They say the worst betrayals come wrapped in promises of forever. Lily Moore learned that truth the night she watched her true mate choose a crown over their love, over the bond they share in secret, over the promises of forever, and over their children. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you are already hooked in on today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We like to know our pack members from all over the world. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The throne room of Thornhaven blazed with 1,000 torches, their flames casting dancing shadows across marble columns that had stood for centuries. Lily Moore pressed her spine against the cold stone pillar, her fingers trembling where they gripped the rough surface. She should not be here. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat to the hidden passages, to return to the safety of shadows where a healer of common blood belonged. But she could not make herself leave. Not when Magnus Thorne stood on the dais at the far end of the hall, his powerful frame wrapped in ceremonial black and gold. Not when his voice had summoned every noble house in the kingdom to witness what he had promised would be the most important announcement of his reign. 3 nights ago, in the darkness of his private chambers, Magnus had held her face between his hands and whispered promises that had made her heart soar. Soon, he had said, his amber eyes burning with intensity. Soon I will tell them all. No more hiding in the shadows, Lily. No more pretending you are anything less than mine. Lily's hand drifted to her belly, where a secret had been confirmed by the palace healer just 2 weeks ago. For months along, though she had only recently begun to show. She had been saving this revelation for tonight, for after the announcement, when she could finally tell Magnus that their bond had already borne fruit. She had imagined his face when she told him. The way his eyes would soften with wonder. The way he would drop to his knees and press his lips to her stomach, as he had pressed them to every inch of her skin during the months of their hidden love. But something was wrong. Lily could feel it in the cold weight settling behind her ribs, could see it in the rigid set of Magnus' shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched as if he were bracing himself for battle. His eyes, usually warm when they found her in any crowd, swept across the assembled nobles without pause, without recognition, without the faintest flicker of acknowledgement. The bond mark on her shoulder ached with a dull, persistent throb. "My king," the High Chancellor stepped forward, his ancient voice carrying across the hushed assembly. "The realm awaits your declaration." Magnus' jaw tightened further. "Say it," Lily pleaded silently. "Say my name. Look for me the way you always do, as if I am the only soul in any room that matters." But his gaze remained fixed on some point above the crowd, cold and distant. "I have gathered you here," Magnus said, his voice carrying the weight of command that had always made Lily's heart race, to announce a decision that will secure the future of Thornhaven for generations to come. A murmur rippled through the crowd as a door to the left of the dais swung open. A woman emerged, her crimson gown clinging to curves that seemed deliberately displayed, her midnight hair cascading over bare shoulders like a river of ink, a crown of rubies glittering at her brow. Seraphine Grey. Lily knew her by reputation. The daughter of the wealthiest merchant lord in Thornhaven, whose family controlled the trade routes to 3 kingdoms. Beautiful, calculating, ruthless in her pursuit of power. House Grey had been positioning Seraphine for this moment for years, and everyone in the court knew it. Everyone except Lily, who had believed Magnus when he said their bond transcended politics. "Lady Seraphine Grey," Magnus announced, his voice steady, controlled, utterly devoid of emotion, "has agreed to become my queen. Through this union, Thornhaven will gain unprecedented access to the eastern trade routes, the allegiance of House Grey's considerable military forces, and the economic stability our kingdom desperately needs." The throne room erupted in shocked whispers and enthusiastic applause. Lily's legs nearly buckled. She caught herself on the pillar, her nails scraping against stone as the world tilted beneath her feet. No, this could not be happening. This was not real. Seraphine ascended the dais steps with practiced grace and took her place beside Magnus. Her hand slid possessively over his arm, and she smiled at the crowd with the confidence of a woman who had won a game Lily had not even known she was playing. "I know this announcement may come as a surprise to some," Seraphine said, her voice carrying the false sweetness of poisoned honey. "But I assure you, the people of Thornhaven will benefit greatly from this alliance. Together, the king and I will usher in a new era of prosperity." Lily could not breathe. The bond mark on her shoulder erupted with searing pain, as if someone had pressed a burning coal to her flesh. She bit down on her lip to keep from crying out, tasting copper, feeling hot tears spill down her cheeks. 3 nights ago, Magnus had held her and sworn that she was his fate, his forever, his soul bound to hers by something older than law or duty or politics. Now he stood beside another woman, accepting congratulations and well wishes, while Lily hid in the shadows with his child growing beneath her heart. She searched his face desperately, looking for any sign of the man she loved, any crack in the mask of cold authority. For one heartbeat, his eyes found hers across the crowded hall. Something moved in those amber depths, something that looked almost like regret, almost like pain, almost like a man who had made a choice he knew would haunt him forever. Then Seraphine whispered something in his ear, and he looked away. Magnus raised Seraphine's hand to his lips in the traditional gesture of acceptance. The crowd roared with approval, and Lily felt something inside her chest collapse into ruins. She ran. The servants' corridors swallowed her, narrow and dark and blessedly empty. Every step sent agony radiating from the mark on her shoulder, as if the bond itself was being ripped from her flesh. She did not stop until she reached the tiny chamber she had been given when she first arrived at the palace as a healer's apprentice, before Magnus had found her, before everything had changed. She collapsed against the closed door, her body shaking with sobs she could no longer contain. He had chosen. Consciously, deliberately, with full knowledge of what they shared. Magnus had looked at their bond, at the love they had built in stolen moments and whispered promises, and he had decided it was not enough. Power, affluence, political advantage. These things mattered more to him than she did. Her hand pressed against her stomach, against the tiny life that had felt like a miracle and now felt like a curse. How could she stay here? How could she remain in this palace, where every stone would remind her of whispered promises that had meant nothing? How could she watch Seraphine wear the crown that Magnus had once sworn would belong to Lily? With trembling hands, she began to pack. A worn cloak, a pouch of healing herbs, the silver pendant her mother had left her before the fever took her. Everything she owned fit into a single bag. She paused at the window, looking out at the celebration bonfires being lit across the capital. Somewhere in that palace, Magnus was accepting congratulations for his wise and strategic choice. Seraphine was probably already measuring the royal chambers for new furnishings. Lily pressed her palm to the frosted glass. "I loved you," she whispered to the night. "I would have given you everything." By the time the midnight bells tolled, Lily Moore had slipped through the servants' gate and disappeared into the darkness beyond the city walls. She left behind only a single silver pendant caught on the windowsill, the last remnant of a love that had been sacrificed on the altar of ambition. Chapter 2. Magnus Thorne stood at the window of his private chambers, staring out at the dying embers of celebration fires scattered across Thornhaven. Behind him, servants moved quietly, preparing the royal suite for the arrival of his soon-to-be queen. The scent of roses, Seraphine's favorite, already permeated the air, replacing the subtle lavender that had always reminded him of Lily. His hand moved unconsciously to his chest, pressing against the place where the bond mark burned with persistent, reproachful heat. Even now, hours after the announcement, he could feel Lily through their connection. Her anguish radiated through the thread that bound them, a constant reminder of what he had done. "My king." Tyran, his beta and oldest friend, entered without knocking, a privilege he had earned through decades of loyalty. The preparations are complete. Lady Seraphine will be moved to the royal wing tomorrow. Magnus did not turn from the window. Has there been any word from the healer's quarters? The silence that followed told him everything he needed to know. She's gone, isn't she? Magnus' voice was flat, emotionless. The guards report that Lily Moore left through the servants' gate approximately 2 hours ago. She carried only a single bag. No one attempted to stop her, as there were no orders to detain a common healer. Tyrion's tone was carefully neutral, but Magnus could hear the judgment beneath it. Good, Magnus said, though the word tasted like ash. It's better this way. Cleaner. Is it? Tyrion's restraint finally broke. Magnus, what have you done? That woman is your mate. The bond. The bond is not enough. Magnus whirled from the window, his eyes blazing with amber fire. Do you think I don't know what I've given up? Do you think I can't feel her right now, out there in the darkness, believing I betrayed her? He stalked across the room, his movements predatory, dangerous. But what good is a mate bond when the kingdom is crumbling? What good is love when our people are starving because we lack the trade agreements to feed them? When enemy kingdoms circle like vultures, waiting for us to show weakness. House Grey's resources will save us, Magnus interrupted. Their trade routes, their gold, their armies. Seraphine brings everything Thornhaven needs to survive. What does Lily bring? Healing herbs and pretty eyes. The words hung in the air, cruel and reductive. Tyrion's expression hardened. She brings your happiness, the beta said quietly. She brings the other half of your soul. He stopped abruptly, his eyes narrowing as he studied Magnus' face. There's something else. Something you're not telling me. Magnus turned away, unable to meet his friend's gaze. His hand moved again to the bond mark, to the place where Lily's presence pulsed like a dying heartbeat. Lord Grey made it very clear, he said, his voice low and dangerous. The trade agreement, the military alliance, the economic support, all of it comes with one condition. I will marry his daughter. I will make her my queen. And I cut all ties with any distractions that might complicate that arrangement. So you sold her. Tyrion's voice was thick with disgust. You sold your mate for gold and soldiers. I sold myself. Magnus snarled, his wolf rising dangerously close to the surface. Do you think this is what I wanted? Do you think I haven't spent every moment since agreeing to this cursing my own name? He slammed his fist against the wall, leaving a crack in the ancient stone. But I am the Alpha King. My wants, my needs, my happiness, none of it matters compared to the survival of my people. Lily will understand that. Eventually. Will she? Tyrion's voice was soft now, pitying. Or will she spend the rest of her life believing you chose power over love? Believing she wasn't worth fighting for? The bond mark flared with sudden, agonizing heat. Magnus gasped, his hand flying to his shoulder as Lily's pain crashed through him in waves. Grief. Betrayal. Heartbreak so profound it nearly drove him to his knees. And beneath it all, barely detectable through the maelstrom of emotion, something else. Something small and precious and utterly devastating. A second heartbeat. Magnus' eyes widened in horror as understanding crashed over him. No, he whispered. No, she can't be. But he knew. Through the bond, through the connection that even his rejection could not fully sever, he felt the truth with absolute certainty. Lily was carrying his child. Find her, he commanded, his voice raw with desperate urgency. Tyran, send every tracker we have. Bring her back. I have to explain. You can't. Tyrion's words hit like a physical blow. Lord Grey was explicit. Any contact with Lily Moore voids the entire agreement. You pursue her, you lose everything you just sacrificed her for. Magnus stared at his beta, the full weight of his choice finally settling on his shoulders like a crushing burden. He had chosen power. He had chosen the kingdom. And in doing so, he had condemned the woman he loved to flee into the night, alone and pregnant, believing herself abandoned. Then I've made my choice, he said hollowly. Haven't I? Taran said nothing, but the disappointment in his eyes spoke volumes. Magnus returned to the window, watching the last embers of celebration die in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Lily was carrying his child into an uncertain future. And he, the mighty Alpha King who had sworn to protect what was his, could do nothing but stand in his gilded cage and feel the bond between them slowly begin to wither. In 3 weeks' time, he would marry Seraphine Grey in a ceremony of unprecedented splendor. The alliance would be sealed. The kingdom would be saved. And Magnus would spend every day thereafter living with the knowledge that he had traded his soul for a crown. Chapter 3. 5 months had passed since Lily Moore vanished into the night. 5 months since she had chosen the village of Willowmere precisely because no one would think to look for her there, nestled in a forgotten valley 3 kingdoms away from Thornhaven, the kind of place that existed on no important maps, sustained by sheep farming and the stubbornness of people who had learned to survive without the notice of kings. She had arrived in the dead of winter, a young widow fleeing grief. That was the story she told, and the villagers accepted it without question. They had seen enough tragedy in their own lives to recognize it in others. The abandoned cottage at the edge of the forest became her home. In exchange for her healing skills, the village elders asked nothing more than her presence when sickness came calling. And so Lily became Lila, the healer woman with sad eyes and gentle hands, who never spoke of her past and never received letters from anyone. Now, at 9 months pregnant, she could barely remember the woman she had been in Magnus' arms. That girl had believed in promises and destiny and the power of true love. This woman knew better. Lily stood at her cottage window, one hand pressed to the massive swell of her belly, watching the spring rain fall across the valley. The babies, the elderly midwife had confirmed with wide-eyed wonder, kicked vigorously against her ribs. Twins. She was carrying Magnus Thorne's twin children, and he would never know they existed. The thought should have brought pain. Instead, she felt only a fierce, protective numbness. Mistress Lila? A gentle knock at the door announced Mara, the village baker's wife, bearing a basket of fresh bread. I thought you might appreciate, oh my dear, you look ready to burst. Lily managed a weak smile. Any day now, according to old Esme. Mara set down the basket and studied Lily with maternal concern. You should not be alone when your time comes. Let me stay with you. My daughter can mind the bakery. That's kind, but... No arguments. Mara's voice was firm but warm. Whatever drove you to our village, whatever grief you carry, you don't have to face this alone. We take care of our own here. Tears pricked at Lily's eyes. These simple people with their simple lives had shown her more genuine kindness in 5 months than she had received in years at the palace. They knew nothing of Alpha Kings or political alliances or broken mate bonds. They only knew that a young woman needed help, and they offered it freely. Thank you, Lily whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. That night, as rain battered against the cottage windows, Lily lay awake with her hands on her belly, feeling the twins move restlessly within her. Through the bond mark on her shoulder, which had never faded, despite Magnus' rejection, she could sometimes still feel him. A distant presence, growing fainter with each passing month, but never entirely gone. Tonight, that presence burned with unusual intensity. She could feel his turmoil bleeding through the weakened connection. Guilt. Regret. A desperate longing that made her bond mark pulse with heat. Lily pressed her hand to the scar, willing it to stop. She had spent 5 months building walls around her heart, fortifying herself against the memory of amber eyes and whispered promises. She would not let him back in. Not now. Not ever. He had made his choice. Power over love. Affluence over their bond. Seraphine Grey over the woman who carried his children. And Lily had made her choice too. She would raise these babies alone. She would build a life in this quiet valley, far from thrones and crowns and the man who had shown her that even true mates could be traded for the right price. A sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. Lily gasped, her hand flying to her belly as another contraction followed swiftly on the heels of the first. The twins, it seemed, had decided their time had come. "Mara," she called out, knowing the baker's wife had insisted on sleeping in the cottage's second room. "Mara, it's time." As the older woman rushed to her side and sent the baker's son running for old Esme, Lily felt something shift within her. Not just physically, but emotionally. Spiritually. The moment her children entered the world would mark the beginning of her new life, a life she would build on her own terms, with her own strength. Magnus Thorne had chosen his path. Now Lily would forge hers. And if the bond between them withered and died in the process, so be it. Some prices were simply too high to pay, even for the other half of one's soul. The rain continued to fall as Lily's labor began in earnest. And far away, in a palace built on compromises and regret, an alpha king suddenly gasped and pressed his hand to his chest, feeling through a bond he had tried to sever the unmistakable sensation of new life entering the world. 2 lives. 2 perfect, powerful heartbeats that he would never know. The consequence of his choice had arrived. Chapter 4. Magnus Thorne stood in the grand ballroom of Thornhaven Palace, surrounded by celebrating nobles, and felt nothing but emptiness. 6 months had passed since his marriage to Seraphine Grey, 6 months of trade agreements and military parades, and the kind of political success that should have vindicated his choice. Instead, he felt as though he were slowly dying from the inside out. "My king," Seraphine appeared at his elbow, resplendent in a gown of midnight blue silk, the queen's crown glittering on her perfectly coiffed hair. "Lord Merchant is asking about the northern expansion. You promised to discuss it with him." Magnus looked down at his wife, his queen, and tried to summon even a flicker of the warmth he had once felt for Lily. There was nothing. Seraphine was beautiful, intelligent, politically astute. She was everything a queen should be. And she was not his mate. "Tell Lord Merchant I'll speak with him tomorrow," Magnus said, his voice flat. Seraphine's smile never wavered, but something cold flashed in her dark eyes. "Of course, my king. Though I must say, you've been rather distracted lately." "Is something troubling you?" "Everything. Everything is troubling me." But he could not say that. Could not admit that every night he lay beside a woman he felt nothing for, his bond mark burning with the phantom pain of a connection that had been severed by his own hand. Could not confess that he felt Lily through that dying thread, felt her grief transform into strength, felt her building a life without him, felt the presence of 2 small lives that he knew, somehow, were his children. "I'm fine," he lied. "Just tired." Seraphine studied him with calculating eyes. She was not stupid. She had surely noticed that her husband had never once come to her chambers willingly, that he fulfilled his marital duties with mechanical efficiency and nothing more, that his eyes were always distant, searching for something, someone, who was no longer there. "The healer girl," Seraphine said suddenly, her voice sharp as a blade. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" Magnus' head snapped toward her, his wolf rising dangerously close to the surface. "Watch your tongue." "Or what?" Seraphine's smile was cruel now, all pretense dropped. "You'll divorce me? Break the alliance that's keeping your precious kingdom afloat? We both know you won't do that, Magnus. You've already proven what you're willing to sacrifice for power." The truth of her words hit like a physical blow. Magnus turned away, unable to bear the knowing look in her eyes. "I knew about her, you know," Seraphine continued, her voice honey-sweet and poisonous. "From the very beginning. My father's spies are quite thorough. We knew you had a mate, knew you were sneaking around with some common-born healer like a besotted fool." She circled him slowly, predator assessing prey. "That's why father made the terms so clear. No contact with the girl. Ever. He knew you'd be tempted to keep her as a mistress, to try to have both the power and the love. But that's not how this works, my dear husband. Magnus' hands clenched into fists at his sides. You've made your point. Have I? Seraphine laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Because you still look at me like I'm the enemy, when really I'm your salvation. Everything you have, the trade routes, the armies, the economic stability, you have because of me. Because of what I bring to this marriage. She leaned in close, her breath hot against his ear. So perhaps you should show a bit more gratitude, Perhaps you should stop pining for a woman who's probably moved on with her life and start appreciating the queen who's actually standing beside you. Magnus felt something crack inside him. The last fragile hope that perhaps this marriage could be bearable, that perhaps he could find some measure of peace in the life he had chosen, shattered like glass. Seraphine Grey was not his partner. She was his jailer. And he had walked willingly into this cage. Get out, he said quietly. Excuse me. Get out. The command came out as a roar that silenced the entire ballroom. Nobles froze mid-conversation. Musicians stopped playing. Every eye turned toward the king and queen. Seraphine's face flushed with fury and embarrassment, but she knew better than to challenge an alpha's direct command. She turned on her heel and swept from the room, her dignity intact even in retreat. The celebrations resumed nervously. Magnus stood alone in the center of the ballroom, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on him, knowing that by morning the entire kingdom would be whispering about the rift between their king and queen. He did not care. All he cared about was the fading warmth of a bond he could no longer fully feel, the ghost of lavender perfume that still haunted his dreams, and the knowledge that somewhere out there, Lily Moore was raising his children alone while he played king beside a woman he despised. This was his regret. This was his consequence. And there was no escape. Chapter 5. 10 months after Lily's disappearance, Magnus Thorne made a decision that would either save him or destroy everything he had sacrificed her for. You're insane, Tyron said flatly, staring at his king across the war room table. Lord Grey will pull every agreement. The alliance will collapse. Everything you gave up Lily for will be gone. Magnus continued marking locations on the map spread before them. Then it will be gone. I can't live like this anymore, Tyran. I can feel her out there. Feel them. His beta's expression softened with understanding. Through the mate bond that had never fully died, Magnus had felt the birth of his children, twins. He was certain, though he had no way to confirm it. The sensation had nearly brought him to his knees in the middle of a council meeting. Since that moment, the bond had grown stronger rather than weaker. As if the birth of his children had somehow reinforced the connection he had tried to sever. Every night, Magnus dreamed of Lily holding babies he had never seen. Every morning, he woke to find the bed beside him occupied by a woman he had married for all the wrong reasons. I made a mistake, Magnus said quietly. The biggest mistake of my life. I chose power over love, and I've been dying slowly ever since. I need to find her, Tyran. I need to at least apologize. To see my children. To try to make this right. And if she won't see you? Tyran asked gently. Magnus, you rejected your mate in the most public, humiliating way possible. You married another woman while she carried your children. What makes you think she'll even listen to your apology? Nothing, Magnus admitted. I have no right to expect her forgiveness. No right to ask for a second chance. But I have to try. Even if she turns me away, even if she hates me for the rest of her life, I need her to know that I was wrong. That choosing her would have been worth any cost. The bond mark on his shoulder pulsed with heat, as if responding to his words. Magnus pressed his hand to it, closing his eyes and reaching through the connection with everything he had. Lily, I'm coming. Please, please don't hide from me anymore. He felt nothing in response. Either she was blocking him, or the distance was too great. Either way, he would find her. The bond might be damaged, but it still existed. And a mate bond, no matter how wounded, would always lead him home. I'm with you, Tyron said finally. Whatever happens, whatever the cost, I'm with you. Magnus looked up at his oldest friend, gratitude burning in his chest. "Thank you." But Tyron continued, his expression grave. "You need to understand something. Even if you find Lily, even if she's willing to hear you out, you can't undo what you did. You can't unmake your choice. You're married to Seraphine. You're bound by political agreements that affect thousands of lives." "I know. Do you?" Tyron leaned forward intently. "Because you're talking like a man who thinks he can have everything back. But Magnus, some choices are permanent. Some consequences can't be fixed, no matter how much we might wish otherwise." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Magnus sank into his chair, the full weight of his situation crashing down on him. Tyron was right. Even if he found Lily, even if by some miracle she forgave him, what then? He could not divorce Seraphine without destroying the kingdom's economy. Could not dissolve the alliance without leaving Thornhaven vulnerable to enemies who had been held at bay only by the threat of House Grey's military might. He had traded Lily for the kingdom's survival, and that trade could not be reversed. "Then what am I searching for?" Magnus asked hullily. "What's the point of finding her if I can't give her what she deserves?" "Closure," Tyron said gently. "For both of you. A chance to apologize. A chance to meet your children. A chance to know that even though you can't be together, even though you made an irreversible choice, she's okay. That she's built a life and she's happy. And if she's not happy," Magnus' voice cracked, "if she's struggling, if she needs help, then you help her," Tyron said firmly. "You make sure she and your children have everything they need, even if you can't be there yourself. You find a way to support them from a distance, to ensure they never want for anything." It was not enough. Would never be enough. But it was all he could offer. Magnus stood, his decision made. "I leave tomorrow at dawn. Tell the council I'm inspecting the Northern Territories. Tell Seraphine whatever you like. But I'm finding Lily and I'm meeting my children, even if it's the last thing I do." That night, as Magnus prepared for his journey, he felt the bond mark pulse with unexpected warmth. For just a moment, impossibly, he thought he felt Lily's awareness brush against his own. Then it was gone, leaving him alone with his regrets and the faint hope that perhaps, somewhere in this broken mess he had created, there might still be a chance for redemption. Even if that redemption looked nothing like he had imagined. Chapter 6. It took Magnus 3 weeks of searching, following the pull of the bond through 3 kingdoms, before he finally found Willowmere. The village was exactly as he had imagined it, small, remote, the kind of place where a woman could disappear and never be found unless she wanted to be. He stood at the edge of the forest as sunset painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson, his heart pounding against his ribs. The bond had grown stronger with every mile, and now it burned with an intensity that told him she was close. So close. There, Tyron pointed to a cottage at the valley's edge, smoke curling from its chimney. "That's where the bond is leading you." Magnus' breath caught. After 10 months of longing and regret, after countless nights dreaming of this moment, she was finally within reach. His mate. The mother of his children. The woman he had destroyed with his own ambition. "What will you say to her?" Tyron asked quietly. Magnus shook his head. "I don't know. How do you apologize for something unforgivable?" "You don't," his beta said gently. "You just tell the truth." Magnus approached the cottage alone, his footsteps heavy with dread and desperate hope. Through the window, he could see warm lamplight. Could hear the faint sound of a lullaby being sung in a voice that made his soul ache with longing. He raised his hand to knock, then froze. What right did he have to intrude on the peace she had built? What right did he have to appear on her doorstep and demand forgiveness? None. He had no right. But he was here anyway, because living without knowing had become unbearable. Magnus knocked. The lullaby stopped. Footsteps approached the door, light and cautious. Then silence. "I know you're there," Magnus said quietly, pressing his palm against the rough wood. "I can feel you through the bond. Please, Lily. Please let me see you." More silence. Then, in a voice as cold as winter frost, "Go away, Magnus." The sound of his name on her lips, even spoken in anger, nearly brought him to his knees. "I can't. Not until you hear me out. Hear you out." The door swung open, and Magnus forgot how to breathe. Lily stood in the doorway, more beautiful than he remembered, more real than any dream. Her pale hair fell in waves around her shoulders. Her eyes, those eyes that had once looked at him with such love, were hard as diamonds. "You want me to hear you out," she repeated, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury. "What could you possibly say that would make any of this okay? That would justify what you did?" "Nothing," Magnus said hoarsely. "There's nothing I can say to justify it. I came to apologize. To tell you that I was wrong. That I've regretted my choice every single day since you left." "Your regret means nothing to me." Lily's hand moved to the doorframe, gripping it so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Do you have any idea what it was like? Watching you choose her? Fleeing into the night, pregnant and alone, believing I meant so little to you that you could trade me for political advantage." "I know. You know nothing." The shout echoed across the valley. "You stood there in your palace with your crown and your power and your new wife, and I was here. I gave birth to your children alone, Magnus. I labored for 18 hours in this cottage with only the village midwife to help me, because the man who swore to love me forever decided I wasn't worth keeping." "Children." The word hit Magnus like a physical blow. Can I see them?" Lily's expression shuddered completely. "No. Lily, please. They're my children too. I have a right." "You have no rights here," she cut him off savagely. "You gave up every right you had when you chose Seraphine Grey. Those children are mine. I carried them. I birthed them. I have spent every day of the last 5 months feeding them and loving them and building a life for them. They are mine, and you are nothing but a stranger who happens to share their blood." Magnus felt tears burn in his eyes. "I know I don't deserve to see them. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But Lily, please, I'm begging you. Let me at least look at them. Let me know they're healthy and safe." For a long moment, Lily simply stared at him. Magnus could see the war playing out across her face, anger warring with the faint echo of the love they had once shared, the desire to hurt him as he had hurt her fighting against her fundamental kindness. Finally, she stepped back from the door. 5 minutes. That's all you get? Magnus crossed the threshold into the modest cottage, his heart hammering. The interior was simple but warm, filled with the kind of humble comfort he had never appreciated in his palace. And there, in a wooden cradle near the hearth, were his children. Twins. A boy and a girl, both with dark hair that matched his own. As he approached, the girl opened her eyes and Magnus' breath caught. Amber. Perfect amber, exactly like his. "Her name is Aurora," Lily said quietly. "And the boy is Asher. They're 5 months old." Magnus knelt beside the cradle, his hand reaching out then stopping, uncertain if he had permission to touch them. "They're perfect," he whispered. "Lily, they're absolutely perfect." "I know." Her voice was thick with emotion. "I've known that from the moment they were born. I should have been there." The words tore from Magnus' throat. "I should have been holding your hand when they came into this world. I should have been the one to cut their cords and welcome them. I should have." "But you weren't," Lily interrupted flatly. "You were with your wife. Your queen. The woman you chose over us." Magnus looked up at her, tears streaming freely now. "I was wrong, Lily. So catastrophically wrong. I thought I was doing the right thing, choosing the kingdom over personal happiness. But I was a fool. I gave up everything that mattered for power that tastes like poison in my mouth. And now you want me to forgive you?" Lily's laugh was bitter. "You want to be absolved so you can go back to your palace and your wife and feel better about your choices?" "No." Magnus rose to his feet, facing her directly. "I don't want your forgiveness, because I don't deserve it. I came here because I needed you to know the truth. That I regret every moment of the last 10 months. That if I could go back and make a different choice, I would in a heartbeat. That you and these children are worth more than all the kingdoms in the world. But you can't go back, Lily said quietly. Can you? You're married. You're bound by agreements and alliances. Even if I wanted to forgive you, which I don't, there's no future for us. You made sure of that. The truth of her words shattered the last fragile hope Magnus had been carrying. She was right. Even standing here, even seeing his children, even knowing he had made the wrong choice, none of it could undo what he had done. Your 5 minutes are up, Lily said, her voice empty now, all the fire gone. Go back to Thornhaven, Magnus. Go back to your queen and your power and your regrets. Leave us alone. Lily, please. The word was barely a whisper. Please just go. Seeing you here, knowing you're alive and well while her voice broke. Just go. Magnus looked one last time at his sleeping children. Memorized their perfect faces. Then he turned and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he paused. If you need anything, money, protection, anything at all. We don't need anything from you, Lily said firmly. We're fine on our own. We always have been. The door closed behind him with a finality that felt like death. Magnus stood in the gathering darkness, feeling the bond between them pulse with wounded grief on both sides. He had found her. He had seen his children. And now he would have to live with the knowledge that they would grow up without him, that Lily would never forgive him, that he had traded the love of his life for a kingdom that felt increasingly hollow. This was his consequence. This was the price of his choice. And it would haunt him until his dying breath. Chapter 7. 3 months passed. 3 months during which Magnus returned to Thornhaven and tried to resume the life he had built on a foundation of regret. But something fundamental had broken during that visit to Willowmere. He could not unsee Aurora's amber eyes. Could not forget Asher's perfect tiny fingers. Could not erase the image of Lily standing in that humble cottage doorway, fierce and beautiful and utterly beyond his reach. The council is concerned, Tyran reported during one of their private meetings. They say you've been distracted. Those decisions are being delayed. Lord Grey is particularly vocal about his daughter's complaints. Magnus waved a dismissive hand. Let him complain. His precious alliance has given him everything he wanted. Has it? Tyran's expression was troubled. Magnus, you need to engage with this marriage. You need to at least pretend. I can't. Magnus' voice was hollow. I've tried, Tyran. Gods know I've tried. But every time I look at Seraphine, all I see is what I gave up to have her. Every time she speaks, all I hear is Lily's voice telling me to leave. I can't pretend anymore. I don't have the strength. He slammed his fist against the wall, leaving a crack in the ancient stone. I made my choice. Now I live with it. But endurance, Magnus was learning, was its own form of slow death. Meanwhile, in Willowmere, Lily was discovering something entirely different. She was discovering that she could not only survive without Magnus, she could thrive. The village had embraced her completely. Her healing skills had saved lives during a harsh winter, and the grateful families had repaid her with support and genuine affection. She was no longer an outsider. She was Lila, the healer, mother to the most beautiful twins anyone had ever seen. Aurora and Asher were growing beautifully. At 8 months old, they were already showing signs of the power they carried. Aurora's eyes would flash amber when she was angry. Asher could make small objects move with the force of his infant will. Lily watched them develop with pride and a fierce, protective love that had nothing to do with their absent father. You're amazing, you know, Mara said one afternoon as they sat in Lily's cottage, watching the twins play on a blanket before the hearth. Raising them alone, building a life here. You're the strongest woman I've ever met. Lily smiled, though the expression was touched with sadness. I didn't have a choice. When the alternative is falling apart, you find strength you didn't know you had. Still, Mara persisted. Most women would have crumbled. But you've done more than survive. You've created a beautiful life for yourself and your children. It was true. Lily had not just survived Magnus' rejection, She had transcended it. The bond mark on her shoulder still pulsed occasionally, especially late at night when she could feel his misery bleeding through the connection. But she had learned to block it out, to protect herself from the waves of regret that meant nothing without action to back them up. Magnus had made his choice, and Lily had made hers. She chose her children. She chose this simple village life. She chose peace over the chaos of palace politics. And she chose not to forgive the man who had thrown her away like she was worthless. The next morning, Lily woke to find a leather purse on her doorstep. Inside was more gold than she had ever seen in her life, along with a simple note written in handwriting she recognized immediately. For Aurora and Asher. So they never want for anything. Lily stared at the gold for a long moment. It was a fortune. Enough to ensure her children's future, to buy them anything they might need. It was also an insult, as if money could replace a father's presence, as if Magnus could buy his way out of the consequences of his choice. She packed the gold carefully and sent it back via the same messenger who had delivered it, along with her own note. Keep your gold. We don't need anything from you. We never did. When Magnus received the returned purse, he sat in his chambers and wept. Not because Lily had rejected his money, but because her message had made one thing abundantly clear. She did not need him. She had built a life without him. And no amount of regret or gold or desperate longing would change that. He had lost her. Completely. Irrevocably. And all the power in the world could not bring her back. Chapter 8. 2 years had passed since Magnus' visit to Willowmere. 2 years during which the kingdom of Thornhaven had prospered on the surface, while its king slowly deteriorated within. The trade agreements with House Grey had indeed brought wealth. The eastern routes flowed with goods. The treasury overflowed with gold. Military alliances kept enemies at bay. By every measurable standard, Magnus' choice had been the right one. But Magnus felt like a ghost haunting his own life. You need to see a healer, Tyron said, his concern evident as he watched Magnus stare blankly at council reports he had no energy to read. You're not eating. You barely sleep. This can't continue. I'm fine, Magnus lied. You're dying, Tyron said bluntly. Maybe not physically, but in every way that matters. The bond. The bond is still there, Magnus interrupted. I can feel her every day. Feel her strength, her happiness, her love for our children. And it kills me, Tyran. It kills me to know that she's thriving without me while I'm here, bound to a woman I can barely stand to look at, ruling a kingdom that feels like a prison. His beta's expression was sympathetic but firm. Then dissolve the marriage. Break the alliance. Yes, it will have consequences, but Magnus, you can't live like this. You're destroying yourself. And what then? Magnus asked bitterly. I go crawling back to Lily, expecting her to welcome me with open arms? She's made it clear she wants nothing to do with me. Returning her gold was not subtle, Tyran. Perhaps not for you, Tyran said carefully. But maybe for yourself. Maybe it's time to stop living for others, for the kingdom, for the alliance, for the hope of Lily's forgiveness, and start living for yourself. Magnus shook his head. I don't even know what that means anymore. That night, Seraphine finally cornered him. She swept into his private study uninvited, her face a mask of cold fury. We need to talk, she announced. Magnus did not look up from the reports he was pretending to read. Do we? Yes. Seraphine's voice was sharp as a blade. About the fact that you're making me look like a fool. About the whispers that the king can't stand his own queen. About your complete and utter disregard for the political implications of your behavior. Magnus said flatly. Political implications. Of course. Because everything between us is political, isn't it, Seraphine? What else would it be? She shot back. You certainly never pretended this marriage was about love. We both knew what we were getting into. Did we? Magnus finally met her eyes. Because I don't think I fully understood what I was signing up for. I thought I could compartmentalize. Thought I could be an effective king with an advantageous marriage while keeping my heart locked away somewhere safe. He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city. I was wrong. Turns out you can't cut out part of your soul and expect to function normally. Who knew? Seraphine's expression flickered with something that might have been sympathy before hardening again. The healer girl. You're still pining for her. She has a name, Magnus said quietly. Lily. And she's not a girl. She's a woman who raised my children alone because I was too much of a coward to choose her over power. Children. Seraphine's voice went cold. You have children with her? Twins. A boy and a girl. Aurora and Asher. They'll be 2.5 years old now. Magnus' voice was hollow. Not that I've seen them since they were 5 months old. Not that I have any right to call them mine. For a long moment, Seraphine was silent. When she finally spoke, her voice was strangely gentle. You really do love her, don't you? With every fiber of my being, Magnus admitted. Which is why I can't give you what you want, Seraphine. I can't pretend to be the devoted husband. I can't manufacture affection I don't feel. The best I can offer is civility and political cooperation. And if I demanded more? Seraphine asked. Then we'd both be miserable instead of just me, Magnus said bluntly. Look, I know this isn't what you envisioned when you married the Alpha King. But this is what we have. A political arrangement that benefits both our houses. Nothing more, nothing less. Seraphine studied him with calculating eyes. And if I wanted to dissolve this marriage? If I found the whole thing as unbearable as you clearly do? Magnus' heart leaped with sudden, desperate hope before reality crashed down. Your father would never allow it. The alliance. My father is old and his influence is waning, Seraphine interrupted. And I'm tired, Magnus. Tired of being married to a ghost. Tired of watching you pine for a woman you can never have. Tired of this farce. She moved closer, her voice dropping. What if I told you there was a way to dissolve our marriage without destroying the alliance? A way for both of us to walk away from this mistake. I'd say you're dreaming, Magnus replied. Your father made the terms clear. The marriage is the alliance. Perhaps, Seraphine said cryptically. Or perhaps there are alternatives neither of us has considered. Give me a month. Let me explore some options. And Magnus. She paused at the door. Don't get your hopes up about your healer. Even if we end this marriage, it won't change the fact that she doesn't want you. The door closed behind her, leaving Magnus alone with a dangerous flicker of hope and the crushing weight of Seraphine's final words. She was right. Even if he somehow freed himself from this marriage, even if he crawled back to Willowmere on his hands and knees, Lily had made her position clear. She did not need him. She did not want him. And no amount of regret could change that fundamental truth. Magnus was learning that some consequences lasted forever. Chapter 9. Seraphine was true to her word. 1 month later, she presented Magnus with an offer that seemed impossible. Lord Blackwood of the Western Territories has proposed an alliance, she explained, spreading documents across the council table. His house is wealthier than my father's, with stronger military connections and better trade routes. He's willing to negotiate a comprehensive agreement with Thornhaven. Magnus scanned the papers with growing disbelief. This is extensive. It's better than what you have with House Grey, Seraphine confirmed. In every measurable way. The only condition is that Lord Blackwood wants a royal marriage to seal the deal. You? Magnus asked, hope and suspicion warring in his chest. Seraphine's smile was complex. Me? He's been interested for years, but I was already promised to you. Now, circumstances have changed. If you dissolve our marriage and grant me the freedom to accept his proposal, Thornhaven gets a better alliance, and we both get what we want. Your father will bluster and rage and ultimately accept it, Seraphine interrupted. Because even he can see that this arrangement benefits everyone. You get your freedom. I get a husband who actually wants me. The kingdom gets better economic and military support. Everyone wins. Magnus stared at the woman who had been his wife for over 2 years, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I deserve better than a husband who looks at me like I'm his prison warden," Seraphine said honestly. "And because you deserve a chance to stop destroying yourself over a choice you can't undo. This won't give you what you want, Magnus. Your healer has made her feelings clear. But at least you won't be trapped in a marriage that makes you miserable." 6 weeks later, the marriage was dissolved with far less drama than anyone had anticipated. Lord Grey complained loudly, but ultimately had to admit that the Blackwood alliance was superior. Seraphine married Lord Blackwood in a ceremony of breathtaking splendor, looking genuinely happy for perhaps the first time since Magnus had known her. And Magnus stood in his chambers, finally free, and realized that freedom without redemption was just another form of cage. Because Seraphine had been right. Lily did not want him. 3 days after the dissolution became official, Magnus made the journey to Willowmere one final time. He brought no guards, no ceremony. Just himself and a desperate need to try once more. Lily opened the door to find him standing there, and her expression immediately shuddered. "No," she said before he could speak. "Lily, please. I've dissolved the marriage. I'm free. We could do what?" Lily's voice was ice. "Pick up where we left off. Pretend the last 3 years never happened? Pretend you didn't choose power over me and then only came back when it was convenient. That's not fair, isn't it?" Lily stepped out of the cottage, pulling the door closed behind her so their voices wouldn't wake the twins. "You made your choice, Magnus. You chose to believe that a kingdom was worth more than our bond. You chose to marry Seraphine even knowing I was pregnant. You chose to stay with her for years while I raised our children alone." Her eyes blazed with fury. "And now that it's convenient, now that you've extracted all the political advantage you could from that marriage, you want to come back? You want me to just forgive you? Welcome you? Let you play father to children who don't even know who you are?" "They're my children too," Magnus said desperately. "By blood, yes," Lily agreed. "But not in any way that matters. A father is someone who's there. Someone who holds them when they cry and teaches them to walk and reads them stories before bed. A father is present, Magnus. And you've never been like that." "I could be," he pleaded. "If you'd just give me a chance." "I gave you a chance," Lily said, her voice breaking. "I gave you every chance. I waited in that palace, carrying your children, believing you would choose me. And you didn't. You showed me exactly what I'm worth to you. And I will not let you do that to my children." Magnus felt tears streaming down his face. "I was wrong. I've spent every day since regretting my choice. Doesn't that count for something?" "No," Lily said simply. "Regret without action means nothing. And even now, even free, you're still thinking about what you want. What you need. You want forgiveness to ease your guilt. You want a relationship with your children to fill the hole in your heart. But what about what we need, Magnus?" She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking exhausted. "We need stability. We need people who won't abandon us the moment something more valuable comes along. We need a life that isn't built on the whims of an alpha king who couldn't decide if we were worth keeping." "You were always worth keeping," Magnus whispered. "You were worth everything. Then why didn't you keep me?" Lily's voice was soft now, sad. "Why did you let me walk away into the night, pregnant and alone? Why did you choose power over love?" Magnus had no answer, no defense. Just the crushing weight of a choice that had defined and destroyed the last 3 years of his life. "I think you should go," Lily said gently. "And this time, don't come back. We've built a good life here, Magnus. A peaceful one. Please don't disrupt it with visits driven by your guilt. Can I at least see them?" Magnus begged. "Just once more." Lily considered for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 5 minutes. Then you leave and you don't come back." Inside the cottage, Aurora and Asher were sleeping. They were bigger now, no longer infants, but small children with distinct personalities already emerging. Aurora had his dark hair and amber eyes. Asher had Lily's delicate features, but his own stubborn jaw. Magnus knelt beside their beds, memorizing every detail. These were his children, his blood, his legacy, and he would never know them, never hear them call him father, never be part of the life Lily had built for them. This was the price of his choice. This was his consequence. And unlike the political arrangements that had defined his reign, this was one burden he would carry alone. "Time's up," Lily said softly from the doorway. Magnus rose, taking one last look at the family he would never have. Then he walked out into the night, feeling the bond mark on his shoulder pulse with finality. Lily watched him go, her hand pressed to her own mark. She felt no triumph in sending him away, only a bone-deep weariness and the certainty that she had made the right choice. Some bonds, once broken, could never be repaired. Some choices could never be unmade. And Magnus Thorne would spend the rest of his life living with that truth. Chapter 10 years later. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Willowmere's newly established healing academy, illuminating rows of eager students bent over their herbal preparations. Lily Moore, now the most renowned healer in 3 kingdoms, moved between the workstations with quiet confidence, her gentle corrections met with respect and admiration. "Mistress Lily, is this the correct ratio?" A young woman held up her mixture hopefully. Lily examined it with practiced eyes. "Almost perfect, Rosalind. Just a touch more golden seal for the infection-fighting properties. Remember, healing is as much about precision as it is about instinct." At 32, Lily had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of countless others. The small cottage that had once been her refuge was now the heart of a thriving compound, a school, clinic, and research center that drew students from across the realm. What had started as simple village healing had evolved into something far greater. Her breakthrough work on combining traditional herbal medicine with innovative techniques had revolutionized healthcare in remote communities. Nobles and commoners alike sought her expertise. She had been offered positions in royal courts, academic appointments in prestigious universities, wealth beyond measure. She had declined them all. Willowmere was her home. These people, this life, this was where she belonged. "Mama!" Aurora burst through the door, her 17-year-old face flushed with excitement. "The representatives from the southern kingdoms have arrived. They want to discuss establishing sister academies in their territories." Lily smiled at her daughter. Aurora had inherited not just her father's amber eyes, but his commanding presence, though she wielded it with a compassion Magnus had never mastered. She had grown into a remarkable young woman, brilliant and fierce, studying both healing and diplomacy with equal passion. "And where's your brother?" Lily asked, though she already knew the answer. "In the library, where else?" Aurora laughed. "He's translating those ancient medical texts from the Eastern Empire. He says he's close to understanding their fever reduction techniques." Asher had his mother's gentle nature and insatiable curiosity. At 17, he had already published 2 papers on herbal remedies that had garnered attention from scholars across the continent. While Aurora thrived in leadership and public speaking, Asher found his calling in research and quiet innovation. Neither of them knew the full truth about their father. They knew he was a king who had made a choice, who had not been able to be part of their lives. They knew Lily had raised them alone, had built this life from nothing. They had asked questions over the years, and Lily had answered honestly but without bitterness. "He loved you," she had told them when they were old enough to understand. But love isn't always enough when people make choices based on fear rather than faith. He chose what he thought was duty. "I chose you. And I would make that choice again every single day." The twins had absorbed this truth and moved forward, secure in their mother's unwavering devotion and the community that had embraced them. They did not pine for an absent father. They did not feel incomplete. They had been loved so fully, so completely, that there was no room for the hollow ache of abandonment. Later that evening, after the representatives had left with promises of partnership and support, Lily stood in her private garden watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of amber and gold. Her hand moved unconsciously to her shoulder, where the bond mark had faded to little more than a silver scar. She rarely felt Magnus through the connection anymore. Over the years, the bond had weakened to almost nothing, a ghost of what it once was. Occasionally, she would catch fleeting impressions of his loneliness, his regret, his hollow existence in that grand palace. She felt no satisfaction in his suffering, no triumph. Only a distant sadness for a man who had traded everything real for the illusion of power. Mistress Lily? Mara, now gray-haired but still sharp as ever, approached with a sealed letter. This just arrived. Royal Courier. From Thornhaven. Lily's heart did not race. She took the letter calmly, broke the seal, and read. Lily, I am writing to inform you that I am ill. The healers say I have perhaps a year, maybe less. I do not write seeking your pity or your medical expertise. I write because I want you to know that you were right about everything. You built a life of meaning and purpose. You raised our children to be remarkable individuals. You transformed your pain into power and your betrayal into strength. I, meanwhile, have spent a decade sitting on a throne surrounded by people who respect my position but not the man who holds it. The kingdom prospers. The alliances hold. By every political measure, I succeeded. But I wake each morning in an empty bed, rule over people I do not know, and live a life devoid of genuine connection. I chose power over love, and power has proven to be a cold, bitter companion. I do not ask for forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I simply wanted you to know that you were the strong one. You were the brave one. You picked up the pieces of what I destroyed and turned them into something beautiful. Our children will never know me, and that is my consequence to bear. But I hope they know how extraordinary their mother is. How she took betrayal and transformed it into triumph. How she loved them so fiercely that the absence of a father meant nothing in the face of her presence. I am glad you did not forgive me. You deserved better than my regret. You deserved better than my excuses. You deserved the life you built without me. May you find happiness in the years ahead. May our children continue to flourish under your guidance. And may you never, for even a moment, regret the strength it took to walk away from a man who did not value what he had until it was gone. With respect and remorse. Magnus. Lily folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her pocket. She would not respond. There was nothing left to say. Magnus had finally understood what she had known from the moment she fled Thornhaven, that loving someone did not mean accepting their betrayal. That strength was not in forgiveness, but in refusing to diminish yourself for someone else's choices. She had picked up the pieces he had shattered and built a mosaic more beautiful than the original could ever have been. Her life was full of purpose, of love, of genuine connection with her children and her community. She did not need his acknowledgement of her strength. She had never needed him at all. Bad news? Mara asked gently. No, Lily said, surprised to find she meant it. Just someone finally understanding a lesson learned too late to matter. That night, Lily gathered Aurora and Asher in the sitting room. They were leaving in a week, Aurora to begin her diplomatic training in the Eastern Kingdoms, Asher to study with renowned scholars in the South. Her children were launching into their own remarkable futures, built on the foundation she had created. I'm so proud of you both, she said, her eyes bright with tears of joy rather than sorrow. You're going to change the world. I know it. We learned from the best, Aurora said, embracing her mother fiercely. Everything we are, everything we'll become, it's because you showed us what real strength looks like. You taught us that broken things can be made beautiful again, Asher added quietly. That pain can be transformed into purpose. That the truest power is not in forcing others to bend to your will, but in building something meaningful that outlasts you. Lily held her children close, feeling the fullness of a life well lived. She had been betrayed by a man who chose power over love. She had fled into the night, pregnant and alone, believing herself discarded. And from those ashes, she had built an empire of healing and hope. She had raised children who would impact generations. She had created something that would endure long after Magnus' kingdom had crumbled to dust. 3 kingdoms away, in a palace that felt more like a mausoleum, Magnus Thorne sat alone in his chambers, staring at the portrait he had commissioned of Lily from a description given by a traveling merchant. He had never forgotten her face, but seeing it rendered in oil and canvas made the loss feel fresh again. He had everything a king could want: wealth, power, respect, security. And he had nothing that mattered: no love, no family, no purpose beyond maintaining systems he no longer believed in. The illness was progressing faster than expected. Soon, he would die and Thornhaven would pass to a distant cousin. His legacy would be economic policies and trade agreements. Lily's legacy would be the lives she had saved, the healers she had trained, and the children she had raised to be forces for good in a world that desperately needed them. He had chosen power. She had chosen love. And in the end, karma had proven to be ice cold. Magnus closed his eyes and pressed his hand to the faded bond mark on his shoulder, feeling nothing but emptiness on the other end. Lily had moved on so completely that even the mate bond had released its hold. She was free. She was happy. She was thriving. And he was exactly what he deserved to be: alone. Back in Willowmere, Lily opened the window to let in the cool night air. The bond mark on her shoulder gave one final, faint pulse, then went completely, blissfully silent. She smiled and closed the window, returning to the plans spread across her desk for the new healing academy in the Eastern Kingdoms. Her life was full of purpose and promise. Her children were extraordinary. Her work would outlast her by generations. Magnus Thorne had been a chapter in her story. But she had written the ending herself, in her own hand, on her own terms. And it was beautiful. Thank you for staying with me till the very end. Please drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing which moments touched your heart the most. Remember, loving someone doesn't mean accepting their betrayal, and strength isn't measured by how much pain you can endure. It's measured by how beautifully you rebuild. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.